This is Chris Sims.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
This is Danielle Smith, and welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Tuesday. How's everybody doing today? Let's start here. Silver, gold, bull. My go-to for precious metals, whether they're with their complete in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing, or adding precious metals to your retirement accounts. They talk a lot about the price of gold as a measure of trust in the government. And with gold at all-time highs, well, we all know it. We can all see it. We're all waiting for the bloody election to happen. Trust in government is plummeting to all-time lows. And, our election live stream the other night where I think now the numbers show over 34,000 people have tuned in. There's this thing where you just nobody trusts the government. Nobody trusts mainstream. Trust in general is just at an all-time low. For a couple of kids from, small town Alberta now to be doing election live streams and garnering that type of attention really shows where people are putting their faith. And when it comes to Silver Gold Bull, they got an exclusive offer for SMP listeners on quarter-ounce gold coins from the Royal Canadian Mint. So for anyone looking to protect their savings with physical gold, these low-cost fractional coins are a great buy. You can just go down in the show notes and text or email Grahame for more details. If you're on silvergoldbull.ca or .com, make sure on any of your purchases just to reference, hey, listening to you guys on Shaun Newman Podcast. It helps me, helps you, and helps them know that everyone's paying attention. RecTech Power Products, for the past 20 years, they've been leaders in the power sports industry. But let's talk about some trailers, shall we? They got aluminum trailers from Lethbridge, utility trailers, dump trailers, goosenecks, all Alberta built, and they give you a lighter pull with the ability to haul a larger payload. So they're pretty pumped about that, and they want you to come out to the west side of Lloyd to take a look at them. Of course, if you get inside their showroom, you're going to be just like, if you've never been in RecTech, you walk in there like, man, this is a nice building, one. Two, you're like, this is a crazy amount of stuff in there. From golf carts to lawnmowers to I got to go take a ride on a Riker, one of those, kind of, what would they call them? They're kind of like a motorbike, but they got the two wheels in the front and the one in the back. They're for guys like me that would probably kill ourselves on a motorbike. That's how I call it. And pretty cool. You should stop in and see Ryan today and talk to him about it. There's lots of cool stuff sitting out there. And like I say, from golf carts to lawnmowers to the Rikers to, side-by-sides and quads, and now it's Skidoo season, and on it goes. So there's lots of cool stuff. They're open Monday through Saturday, and for further details, you can go to rectechpowerproducts.com. Ignite Distribution out of Wainwright, Alberta. They can supply industrial safety, welding, and automotive parts. They got an on-site inventory management system, which helps make sure when you're, maybe this winter heading off to the mountains and you don't want to worry about your business falling apart while you're gone, they can make sure that you're stocked up on everything you need to be. So when you take off for the, the snowy season, your business keeps on a-trucking. Give Shane Stafford a call, 780-842-3433. Substack. It is, you probably noticed that the weekend review came out on Monday. Oh, man. Between live election coverage Saturday night, I usually get up Sunday mornings at 5 a.m. and, work on it. It's very therapeutic. I really enjoyed doing it. But we were up until after, I think it was close to 1 in the morning, and I tried willing myself to get out of bed at 5, and I got up for probably 45 minutes, and finally, what am I doing? I went back to bed, and then we had U7 hockey practice at 8 a.m., so we were on the ice, and then you probably saw I was playing in formerly the Dusty Man Memorial Hockey Tournament, now the Hot Rod Memorial, in honor of Rodney Boutin, and so I was playing out there, and and on and on and on and on. So I finally got done this Monday morning, and it was out. So the week in review, the reason I bring it up is it's free to subscribe. Get the week in the review. There's been lots of talk about, when you're releasing 5 episodes a week, a week, not a day. How do you keep up? And one of the things I've put together is a week in review. You can go, this week's is 3 minutes or less, and you can go watch little excerpts from each of the podcasts, and maybe you can just be like, oh, that's the one I need to go listen to, right? And so that's the free part of Substack. Now there's a paid portion, And paid subscribers here on Wednesday are going to get their first taste of having a guest writer on the Substack. Matt Arrett has written an article, and it's going to be for paid subscribers. So it's the one way you can support the podcast. And I mean, you guys do an excellent job of, coming to the Cornerstone Forum, which I'll get to in a couple seconds here, and other things. I got these Christmas parties going on, and there's 4 tables left with the dueling pianos. That's another way. There's plenty of ways to support me. The one that's reoccurring where I'm trying to give value add is the Substack. And Wednesday morning, you should pay attention. There's going to be a Matt Arrett written piece in there. And if you so choose, you can go read it there and subscribe and become a paid member. That'd be great. If not, totally understand. But that's some of the Substack. Now, the dueling pianos, there is 4 tables left for Friday, November 29th. If you're a company out there looking for something to do, Gold Horse, Casino, dueling pianos should be an exceptional night. Cornerstone Forum, mark this on your calendars, is heading to Calgary at the Winsport May 10th. Keynote speakers including Tom Luongo, Alex Craner, and Chuck Prodnick, working on a whole bunch more, just trying to finalize some names. Once we have them, we'll be announcing those. We got guest hosts confirmed in Chris Sims, Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She was on stage this past one. And Tom Bodrovics will be new, Palisades Gold Radio. So that should be a lot of fun. And looking forward to all of that. Okay, let's get on to today's episode. Let's get on to that tale of the tape. He's the host of Suspicious Observers on YouTube with over 780,000 subscribers. I'm talking about Ben Davidson. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Ben Davidson. So, sir, thanks for hopping on.
Happy to be here. Nice, well, not really a nice day in Colorado, but the world is still spinning, so we can be thankful for that.
110%. It's funny. Your name, I had no idea who you are. It's funny how things on my side of the world start to all of a sudden you just hear the same name over and over and over again. And it started with I believe it was the Clips. And then after that, it's like I just kept running into you everywhere I went. And then Tom Luongo had you on, and I listened to it, and I'm good friends with Tom, and he comes here now once a year. And so I'm like, who is this guy? So I was supposed to meet with Tom in Florida and talk about you, and then that all fell apart. And, you fast forward to finally getting on here, and I'm really excited for this. I think a lot of people are. But I don't know a whole heck of a lot about you. Obviously, I've watched a bunch of your videos. We got a book club. You've become part of the conversation over the last couple of weeks. But other than that, I guess I just want to start with, who is Ben and how did you get into all this stuff?
Sure. So my name is Ben Davidson. I run the Suspicious Observers YouTube channel. On X, formerly Twitter, I am at Sun Weatherman. Basically, I do reporting on what the sun is doing, how it affects the Earth, how Earth is changing, and how these changes are shaping up to dramatically affect our world in the years ahead. I got into this because I was a research expert working for a venture capital firm. I decided, in my off time, I wanted to do research on stuff that I was interested in, not just what would make very, very rich people even richer. And it turns out people were liking what I was doing. So I was able to remove myself from that corporate position and just focus on these research topics, which is, how does the sun affect the weather? How does it affect earthquakes? How does it affect our technology? How does it affect our bodies? And in what ways is the Earth changing to amplify some of these effects? And what does that mean for us in the years ahead?
What year did you start? Like, when you go back, like, when did you start? You're working your day job, and then you're like, yeah, I kind of want to look into a couple things. What year was that?
It was 2010 that I started doing that. I didn't make the YouTube channel Suspicious Observers until 2011. And back then, I was still just sort of reaching fingers out into as many things as possible, trying to discern what was true versus not true among several different vectors or fields of science. Over the years, that has been refined quite a bit. I'd like to think now I've got one of the best BS detectors, at least in the science world. And yeah, it's really just sort of progressed over the last 14 or 15 years.
So when you go back to 2011, you're sitting there, you start looking into this. What was the first thing that you found along that journey where you're like, holy crap, like I never, I don't know what that is. I assume along the way there's been a few of those moments.
Well, so like I said, I wanted to do research on things that were interesting to me. I'm interested in the weather. I'm interested in earthquakes, and they had just launched a new satellite that looks at the sun in only ultraviolet light, so things that our eyes can't see. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So I started reporting on those three things: the sun, earthquakes, and weather. And it became rapidly apparent that people who study weather do not look at the sun. People who study the sun do not look at earthquakes, so on and so forth, vice versa, because it was readily apparent to everyone when there was the sun, weather, and earthquakes being reported consistently day after day after day that patterns were emerging, things that weren't in any textbooks. There were hints of them in some, very complex papers in scientific journals, but in general, nobody really understood that these patterns existed. And it just became rapidly clear that the hyper specialization of science today had sort of prevented the scientists from stepping back out of their box, picking their head up, looking around, and realizing that their science was connected to that science over there, which was connected to that science over there. And so it became very much a tornado of discovery and new connections. Within about a year and a half, the number of professors, NASA scientists, people at the USGS, and several other prestigious organizations, I was interacting with them. I was getting emails from them. Sometimes they were asking questions. Sometimes they were offering data sets. And it really sort of grew organically from there, which, to be perfectly honest, I'm really happy for, because without a lot of those scientists who honestly like to remain sort of below the radar and in the shadows when it comes to talking about some of these things, because some of them are relatively taboo in the science world, we probably wouldn't be where we are today in terms of understanding how all of these things actually work.
Okay, well then I'll start with, here I am, the layman, and I hear you go, sun, weather, earthquakes. What is it that the rest of, I'm going to assume, is it 90%? Is it 99%? I don't know what chunk of the population doesn't realize the connections. What would you say to those people like that? You're like, well, this is what you need to realize.
Well, what you need to realize is that everything the sun does is electromagnetic. Electric currents, magnetic fields. And every way in which the sun impacts the earth is electromagnetic, whether that is the light that is coming in from the sun, whether that is something like a solar flare or the kind of solar storms that produce the northern lights, which have been showing up quite a bit lately. All of those things are electromagnetic inputs of energy to the earth. In terms of the weather, water is extremely reactive to electricity. Even things like carbon dioxide, molecular oxygen, nitrogen, the argon in the atmosphere, every atmospheric component is dramatically impacted by electromagnetic forces, most of all being the clouds. I mean, the way a cloud comes together is there is an electrostatic attraction between a particle of water vapor and dust, and then that's electrostatically attracted to something else and another one and another one. And all of a sudden we've got clouds forming, and everything from how much it rains to whether or not it's cloudy or not cloudy to what kind of lightning is associated or how fast the wind is with that storm, if it forms into a storm, has an electromagnetic component in its recipe, so to speak. When it comes to earthquakes, the ground is full of water, but it's also full of iron and electromagnetically reactive crystals like olivine. Olivine is actually the number one most abundant thing below our feet. And so all of basically everything relating to weather and a lot beneath our feet is subject to influence by those same electromagnetic forces that the sun is imparting on our planet. So if you think about it, it shouldn't even really be that hard to grasp that, okay, yeah, I could see how that would work.
So when a solar flare goes off, and I mean, obviously there would be different sizes and all that. When you're talking about water is extremely reactive to electricity, which makes sense to me. But now you're talking about a solar flare coming in. What are the things it does to water that you could be would be observable, I guess, on Earth?
So there are changes in storm intensity. There are changes in rain rates all across the world. There's changes in what they call total cloud fraction, which is basically they take the sky and they say, okay, how much of the sky is covered by clouds? And they call it what fraction of the sky. So total cloud fraction. That changes dramatically when we get hit with this solar energy.
In more clouds or less clouds?
Usually more clouds. But they can also be, more confined. They can be stronger. They can be thicker. They can be producing more kinds of storms. And a lot of it depends on whether or not you're looking at a high pressure cell or a low pressure cell. And so it does have, there are some instances where it has the exact same impact on the entire atmosphere. And there's other instances where it has one impact on high pressure and the opposite impact on low pressure.
You're about to make me eat my words. I can feel it coming already. My wife and I were talking about the hurricanes in Florida. And she was like, she heard I was bringing you on. She goes, well, does solar flares impact a hurricane and how strong and different things in that nature? And at the time I was like, nah, I can't, and now I'm like, well, obviously it does then.
Sure. And there are actually, at this point now, there are over 50 or 60 scientifically published papers on that exact connection. Now, what the sun can't do is create a hurricane out of nothing. If there wasn't going to be a low pressure system that was going to start spinning very strongly and eventually become some kind of storm, even something as small as like a tropical depression, it can't just spawn a hurricane out of nowhere, but it can add energy to the system. And another thing it can do is it can change the upper level winds in the atmosphere where, say, the top of the hurricane would be. If you've ever heard of wind shear and how that can affect hurricanes, when you get that high up in the atmosphere, the higher up you go, the more the electromagnetic forces from the sun actually have that impact. And so in several different ways, the sun affects hurricanes, tropical storms, typhoons, cyclones. And this has been, like I said, reported in the scientific journals time and time again at this point.
I guess the other thing that stuck out to me on your earlier, a couple of your earlier comments was you said there's certain things you can't, or taboo in science, taboo about this topic. I find that fascinating because, obviously we, when it comes to elections, we just had a provincial election here in to the west of me in British Columbia. And one of the election taboos is COVID, right? Like if you talk about anything to do with that, all of a sudden you're anti whatever they label you and have it. So you can, when I hear taboo, I'm like, ooh, what is it that science doesn't like to talk about in regards to this? Because to me, I'm like, I don't see anything too extreme about what you're talking about.
Well, all of the weather connections from the sun, both in the short term and over long term, there's lots of studies on that as well. Every single one of them eats away at their climate narrative, which is that everything that's happening in the world is terrible. It's leading to catastrophic global warming, and it's all our fault. Well, the problem is, they don't include a lot of those now well-known solar impacts. And, you take it a step further. If the sun is making earthquakes, the sun is dramatically controlling the weather and the long-term climate by extension. That's an absolute no-no for any area of the world that is politically, financially, socially, culturally invested in the climate story as it's told by the mainstream news and things like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you as soon as you said, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? You're gonna talk back about climate change, like I get that. Yeah. That makes complete sense. I'm like, oh, that's why they don't want that. It's fascinating though, isn't it? Like, I mean, once again, to act like the sun wouldn't have impact on what is happening to the Earth seems a bit like a giant hole in anyone's, tool belt or I guess maybe even hypothesis, because it's sitting there. It's so evident.
Well, so here, I'll use an example that goes against my personal beliefs. So I'm in the camp that thinks COVID was a cacophony of nonsense and that the vaccines are actually quite dangerous. That's my personal belief based on the evidence I've seen. But let me go against my personal belief for a second. If you've got somebody who is pointing out, oh, this person got a vaccine, then they had a heart attack. This person got the vaccine, then they had a heart attack. And that's all the information you give to anybody else. Okay, you're painting a certain kind of picture, but what if you're intentionally ignoring their medical history, their genetic history, their diet, whether or not they smoke, how much they drink, what is their body mass index? All these other things that we know have an impact on blood pressure, heart attack, stroke, etc. One could make the argument that, like, okay, you have presented things that happened. Okay, yes, they got the vaccine and then they had the heart attack. But by intentionally ignoring all of this other information, you're really kind of skewing the story to make it seem like your point is true. Now, it just so happens I believe that point when it comes to vaccines. But in terms of the climate change, like I mentioned, we have the light from the sun, but we also have solar flares. We have solar wind. We have high energy protons. We have solar storms. We have the magnetic fields of the sun, which are powerful enough to go all the way out past Pluto. That's a powerful magnetic field. What happens when that hits the Earth? And so all of these studies that talk about climate, the vast majority ignore the sun completely. Like ignoring, in that previous example, genetic history. Oh, wait, you mean this person had a heart attack 2 months ago? Well, that kind of means they're at a higher risk, aren't they? When they do talk about the sun, all they talk about is light, the ultraviolet light from the sun. They don't talk about solar flares. They don't talk about solar wind or proton storms or geomagnetic storms or the interplanetary magnetic fields, which again stretch all the way out past Pluto. And so there's an enormous amount of true things that deserve to be part of the conversation, just like genetic history, diet, exercise habits, BMI, smoking, drinking deserve a place in the health conversation. There's a ton of that within the solar physics realm as well, not to mention the fact that Earth's magnetic field, which is the only thing standing between Earth becoming Mars, and rather than being the way it is now. Mars lost its magnetic field. It had oceans and rivers, possibly life on it long ago. It lost its magnetic field and it became Mars. Our magnetic field at this planet is the only thing stopping that from happening to the Earth. It's the only thing standing in between us and all of the dangerous energies from the sun, supernova, cosmic rays, gamma ray bursts, all the cool but relatively scary stuff you may have seen on a Science Channel episode or something. The only thing protecting this planet is Earth's magnetic field, and we have lost about 20%, maybe more, maybe up to 25 to 30% of our planetary shield since about 1850. That's quite the thing to leave out of every single climate article, while you are also leaving out 80 to 90% of the ways that the sun electromagnetically influences the Earth. And so, when it comes to climate, That's really the story. It's not that their math is wrong. It's not that they're identifying things that are entirely false. It's just they're not giving the entirety of the story here. In fact, they're intentionally leaving it out because if they didn't leave it out, it would destroy their narrative, completely destroy their narrative.
When you talk about the shield over the last, I think, if I'm doing my math, 150
let's just call it 150 to 200 years, approximately.
Sure.
That's how long it's been.
We've lost anywhere between 20 to 30% of our shield.
Right.
My question is, okay, at 0, you get Mars. That
right.
Nobody wants that. So I go, is that a natural cycle? And is there ways the shield comes back stronger and it ebbs and flows? Or is it just slowly?
Absolutely. So there are two kinds of major magnetic changes that happen throughout time. The one most people know about is what technically is called a full Cron magnetic reversal. I don't want to talk too much about those. Those happen every few 100,000 years, and they take several thousand years to unfold. If you were alive during one of these events from birth to death, you might not actually notice much difference. It's happening so slowly. But there's also something called a rapid magnetic pole flip or a geomagnetic excursion. These happen every 6,000 years. So, for example, they actually just gave an official name to the most recent one 6,000 years ago. It's called the Tianqi event. It was named after the place in China where it was confirmed we had this magnetic flip and weakening of the magnetic planetary shield 6,000 years ago. The one before that was 12,000 years ago, called Gothenburg. 18,000 years ago, called Helena Poli. 24,000 years ago, called Lake Mungo. Now, if you can quickly see where I'm going with this, it's about every 6,000 years that this happens. The last one was 6,000 years ago. So we're due in time. And what are we seeing happen with Earth's magnetic field? It is weakening very quickly, and the magnetic poles are actually beginning to shift as well. So we are in the early stages of one of these rapid magnetic pole shifts right now. That is what we are seeing. And as I mentioned, it is speeding up. It is accelerating quite a bit. From about 1850 to the year 2000, so about 150 years, we lost 10% of our planetary shield. We've lost the other 10 to 20% in just the last 2 decades. This thing is speeding up very dramatically. And there was a magnetic anomaly identified last year that likely means we have sped up yet again. Now, this is a pretty dramatic thing that happens. Yes, the magnetic field comes back afterwards and we go back to the Earth that we know and understand. It doesn't stay that way for very long, or else everything you see around us wouldn't be here. But they are very dramatic. And the reason is because when we lose the planetary shield, the first part of the atmosphere that is dramatically impacted is the ozone layer. At the same time, the jet streams become tremendously affected as well. And so those two things combined provide for a kickstarting of a rapid climate event. We are starting to see it now, but it's been identified for these previous ones as well. Now, at the exact same time that this magnetic pole shift is allowing our climate to rapidly change, that shield is letting in more space radiation. And so think about it from the perspective of all of the life on Earth. The climate is changing rapidly at the same time that radiation is surging throughout the atmosphere. Those two things alone are a good enough reason to be concerned. But it's more than just that. Did you know that birds are not the only creatures that use Earth's magnetic field? So do deer, so do dogs, so do bears, so do insects, so do plants. So does nearly everything in the ocean, from shrimp to fish to turtles to whales to sharks. And it's not just for migration purposes. It's how to find feeding grounds. It's how to find breeding grounds. And so you've got the climate changing rapidly at the same time that radiation, ultraviolet, protons, electrons, high energy particles are bombarding us from the sky. And at the same time, various aspects of the food chain are unable to navigate. This is why all of these things combined, every major scientist who has studied these rapid pole shifts that happen on this 6,000 year cycle, including 6,000 years ago and is happening again now, have concluded that this is the reason why there are these groupings of extinctions of species. Technically, there's a species or two that goes extinct almost every day. But when we look back in time, there are these clusters where it seems to happen more often and many more species go extinct all at once. We're not talking like half the planet, but if you average one or two a day, then all of a sudden, for a period of a century or so, you're averaging 5, 10, 15 different species a day. Now, granted, there are 7 million different species on the planet. So it's not putting that huge a dent, but it's also a major thing to be concerned about. And so they all call these events extinction level events at some level, even if it's as minor as this is a minor biosphere disruption event, meaning the biosphere, meaning the life on Earth. And it's not hard to see why. You've got a rapid climate shift, extra radiation, and we've heard this before. You take one knock out of the food chain and it can have drastic impacts up and down the food chain. Well, think about all those species I just mentioned that rely on Earth's magnetic field for navigation. That's playing Jenga all over the place, while the radiation is surging and while the climate is changing so dramatically. So this is a phenomenally important thing that is happening right now, right on time, by the way, in terms of the geological cycles of these events, and virtually nobody is talking about it.
When you bring up animals using the magnetic poles, like that to navigate and on and on and on, so then in theory, right now, you'd be seeing animals like not going to the right spots or showing up where they shouldn't show up, in theory?
We are seeing that, especially in the oceans. There has been a dramatic increase in whale beachings, shark sightings in places that are not expected. They are noticing it with some of the larger sea turtles. They are noticing it with salmon. They are noticing it with some bird flocks as well. They are noticing it with several different species of mammals. It's only to a slight degree now, but it's the fact that it's all happened in just the last decade or so that they're noticing, okay, every couple of years there is some kind of report about this pod of whales went off course or this and that. But the problem is it's happening across the animal kingdom all at once right now, just to a slight degree at this point. But it's going to exacerbate and get worse and worse and worse.
I'm going to say, I'm probably like, I don't know how many thousands of people, maybe millions. I don't know. I don't know how much thought I would have given to much of this, Ben, a while back, And then, what was it? 2 weeks ago, folks? I can't remember exactly. My son, it was like 8:30 here, and my oldest was in bed, and he came running out of his bedroom, and I was yelling at him, get back to bed. And he went tearing out to the back door and opened up, and out we went. I'm like, what the heck is he doing? So I followed him out, and I looked, and like, I grew up in, well, I've lived I grew up on a farm in middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan. Beautiful area. So we see the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. We see it all the time, right? At certain times of year, you get to see it. But I'm now in a city of about, 30,000 people roughly, and to see the stars on a clear night is somewhat difficult. And so when I followed him out there and I was like, Shay, what are you? And I'm like, oh my God. And I don't say, oh my God, lightly, because I was just shocked at the colors of it, the size of it, the fact it was just dancing over my head was just insane. And, and then we went and woke up all the other kids because I'm like, you got to come see this. And so, when you're talking about the animals and just slightly, like this little slight, you're starting to notice it just slightly. It's like, it's just another data point to add in. But these northern lights, like, it wasn't just where I was that they were crazy.
Oh,
Like, it was all over the planet.
they were seeing them at the Mexico border, in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, in Key Largo, Florida. I have seen photos from Venezuela. That's supposed to be impossible. And here's the thing. From about March or April of 2023, I had been logging what happens on the sun, what hits Earth, because we can tell how strong it is, what hits Earth, and the extent to which the northern lights or the southern lights in the southern hemisphere are being seen. And what we've been seeing is what the sun is doing is relatively normal. What's hitting Earth is relatively normal, but the auroras are going out of control. Now, what are the auroras? What is the northern lights and the southern lights? That is that electromagnetic energy from the sun penetrating Earth's magnetic shield and hitting the atmosphere, causing those lights via photoionization. Basically, it charges them up and they begin to glow. Why are we seeing more of that glow, more of that energy penetrating into the atmosphere? Because the shield that is supposed to stop them is weakening. We have seen record aurora, record northern lights and southern lights twice this year. There has not been anything remotely close to a record impact to the Earth or a record solar flare. Okay, what has hit us has not been nothing, but it shouldn't be doing this.
Just so I'm getting this clear.
Sure.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing this correct. This might be a poor way of visualizing it, but I just think of like a Richter scale, like, boop, oh, that was a big shock. Oop, that was a big shot. When you're talking about the sun and what's hitting us, you're saying like there's no big, it goes way up. You're saying it's pretty, but now what we're seeing out of that doesn't make sense to what is actually coming through. So what has changed?
Exactly. The magnetic field that is supposed to block it is weakening because we're in this pole shift. I've actually used similar examples before in the past. Okay, I don't know if you know this, but like along the west coast of the Americas, there's magnitude 1 and 2 earthquakes every single day.
Sure.
Imagine if those started doing the damage that a magnitude 7 earthquake was supposed to do. People would be like, wait a minute. How do you have buildings falling down from a magnitude 1 earthquake? Or imagine if players in Major League Baseball started smoking home runs up to the moon. You would say, okay, now wait a minute here. I know people are getting bigger and stronger, and steroids or not, they shouldn't be able to hit a ball to the moon. Or imagine if, like if you live on the coast of Florida and a hurricane hits your house, you expect to lose your roof. If you live in the middle of Kansas and a tornado hits your house, you expect there to be some damage. If you live in Michigan and you get a gentle summer breeze that starts taking out neighborhoods, you're going to be like, wait a minute. What is happening? This doesn't make any sense. That's exactly what I've been reporting for the last 18 months, because even as I've been tracking this magnetic pole shift for the better part of a decade, what I saw the last 18 months made absolutely no sense. I'm like, this is too much. And so when a few months ago, we got the official scientific paper that was reporting on the major magnetic anomaly from last year, at the exact same time I had to start reporting this preposterous outbreak of auroras, it hit me that, okay, we have hit another acceleration point in this magnetic pole shift, and things are much worse than even I realized. It's an interesting dance I have to do. I don't want to scare the bejesus out of people. One thing I know is we're here talking, so as bad as this is, humans have survived countless of these cycles, and we can do it again. But at the same time, this is really concerning. This is happening much faster and to a much greater degree than I ever imagined it would. And there are just not too many people that have actually caught on and put all of these pieces together. Most people are like, ooh, pretty lights in the sky. And then they hear, oh, we're in the sunspot maximum of the sun's 11-year cycle. That explains it. Well, not really, because what the sun did was nothing even remotely close to what should produce what we are actually seeing on the planet right now.
I don't know. I guess we're in similar. I mean, obviously similar circles, but obviously different too. You're in a different part of the world than I. I think maybe I'm wrong on this. I guess I'd be curious what everybody else thinks on when they listen. But I think a lot of the people that I follow, around my community, looked up at the sky and went, "What is that? Like, beautiful, super cool, but that's, you just couldn't look at it and go like, well, that's normal." I mean, like, I can't remember when I saw purple. I'm like, there was purple in the Northern Lights. Like, what is that?
So, to give you an example, the level of aurora that we have seen twice this year, it has happened before. 2003, 1989, 1921, 1909, 1859. But in each of those instances, what the sun did and what hit the earth was 50 to 100 times stronger than what's hit us this year. And yet we are seeing the same kinds of auroral displays. In fact, we are seeing not only the same strength and different colors, but its extent towards the equator, because the bigger the solar storm, the more it goes from the poles towards the equator.
Sure.
There are no reports from South America or Central America or those West Pacific islands near Fiji and Tonga and Samoa during even the greatest events in known history, but they're seeing them now with 50 to 100 times smaller activity from the sun. That's not good.
I mean, what you're pointing out is like, that's not good. And simple math goes, something's off here, right? I just think most people don't, like where I sit, you bring up the earthquake thing and it's like, yeah, absolutely. What you're talking about makes complete sense. It's just, nobody around here. Do we get earthquakes here in the middle of Alberta, Saskatchewan? No, not that I know about, right? So you just don't even think about it. And the auroras happened my entire life. So for the most part, you never even, it's just natural. It's not a big deal. This is starting to show up, as you keep pointing out, all over the place. It's doing things that in my lifetime, albeit very short, stick out to me. I mean, I've certainly gazed up at the stars and been like, wow, that's pretty cool. But never had my jaw drop to the point where I'm like, holy crap, what is going on?
Right. And so I would say that a lot of people are noticing what you're noticing, but most people don't have, they don't know to look for the data, or they don't even think about, okay, well, why is it happening? And then, okay, well.
So why is it happening? Yeah. Or why?
I mean, the simple answer is because we are in this magnetic pole shift cycle. The thing that would stop that energy from getting into the atmosphere is disappearing. It is getting weaker and weaker and weaker every day. Won't be long before the major effects on the jet stream. We are already seeing a slight increase in the amount of space radiation that reaches the ground. We are already seeing the animals start to go a little haywire here and there. We're only 20-25% of the way into this event. By the time we get halfway into this event, which according to my math should be at some point next decade, it's going to look like chaos. It's going to make what they call global warming so far look like absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
So when you do your math and so you're talking about, I'm just like in my head, I'm going, man, I'm thinking about the conversations I've had with Martin Armstrong. He, in 2020, it's the first time I ever heard Martin Armstrong speak. And then now I've had him on the podcast lots, and he always points to 2032 being a very big upheaval moment. And now you're pointing out in the next decade that, it's only going to get worse. I'm like, okay, now we're starting to have, it's almost like everything's starting to line up for a certain time. And I'm like, what is it about 2030 or that time frame, right? Take it from the people that think we need to be eating bugs and on and on and on. That WEF crowd, right? What date did they have? 2030. And then you tack on what Martin Armstrong's saying, 2032. And now you're saying sometime in the middle of the 2030s, like is it the solar maximum is going to be back around, and that's where it's going to, on top of the fact that the field surrounding us is weakening, and it's all culminating at that time range.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing, the actual flip of the fields probably won't be until the 2040s, but it's the kind of thing where, long before we actually get to that flip, the effects are going to be so tremendous that our way of life is going to become impossible. From a weather standpoint, from a food production standpoint, from a technological standpoint, because that's the other thing. The sun's perhaps primary and main effect here on Earth is it surges electric currents through the planet. These can destroy power grids. They can cause internet and cell phone outages. They can cause electrical explosions, electrical fires, all kinds of network issues. And those are getting worse and worse and worse as well. And so we're going to hit a point where the planetary shield is so weak, probably during the next sunspot maximum in the 2030s, probably somewhere between 2032 and 2037, where the sun's going to do something. It's not going to be all that major. What hits Earth is not going to be all that major, but our shields are going to be so weak, it's going to knock out power to the majority of the globe, if not the entire planet. Nobody's going to have power or internet or cell phone service. There's going to be no refrigeration. There's going to be no shipping and transportation. There's going to be no heat, no air conditioning, no water purification, no water distribution. You go to turn on the tap, nothing's coming out. Your refrigerator's not going to work. Within 2 days, there's going to be nothing at the stores. Within 3 days, there will be nothing at the gas station. ATMs haven't worked since the storm began. We are literally talking about a kind of situation where hospital generators are blowing up and other things like that. This is on top of everything I mentioned before, with the rapid climate shift and the radiation surge and the magnetic navigation basically playing Jenga with the food chain. Humans have become utterly reliant on a globalized electrified structure. The US government conservatively estimates that if there was a major solar storm that took out power at the level I was describing, 90% of the planet would be dead in 6 months. And like I said, that's conservative. It could be more and it could be quicker, because
that got dark real fast.
I'm sorry. Would you like me to make stuff up so it sounds prettier?
No, not at all. My thought goes
important.
Yeah, my thought goes, okay, every 6,000 years. Okay, fair enough. I've heard, I've listened to a lot of different podcasts on cycles and, big events happening every 12,000 years. So that falls right in line with what you're talking about.
So every other cycle seems to be much worse. So some kind of magnetic change happens every 6,000 years. The one 6,000 years ago was bad. 12,000 years ago, horrendous. 18,000 years ago, bad. 24,000 years ago, horrendous. Every 12,000 years, they're horrendously bad. And so unfortunately, that's what we've got coming this cycle.
So my question to you is, because I once again we've been discussing this with the book club and the brothers, and it's come up in a lot of different conversations. Off of what you're looking at, is it possible? Maybe it's 150 years out. Maybe because when it's 6,000 years, is it possible that maybe the 6,000 it could be 500 years away? I mean, I know you. Yes.
So here's. I'm not Jesus, nor do I have a crystal ball. But I will say this. At the rate at which things are changing, we don't have more than 15 to 20 years. At the way the people in the know, in power on this planet are behaving, they know it's about to happen as well. And I mean, think about the way people are behaving, whether you're looking at the masses or you're looking at the people in power. I don't know if you've heard about how many billionaires and millionaires are building bunkers,
Bomb shelters. Yes.
And all right, so I'll step back on this for a second. In terms of all the alternative information in the world, unless you were watching Alex Jones 20 years ago, you didn't know any of this alternative stuff. Why? Because for eternity, as long as we can remember, they have been slow. They have been cautious. They have been calculated. They have wanted to be secretive and incremental and under the radar and very, very patient. Does that seem like the way things are going now, or are they
ramming it down our throats? Yes.
They're acting recklessly because they know there's no time for a reckoning. They are literally throwing the kitchen sink at us and doing all of these things like there's no tomorrow, because on a certain timeline, there isn't one. They are well aware that, and I mean, okay, sure. The cycle, the math, the pattern, the accelerations that have happened over the last 150 to 200 years, for all I know, they could all change tomorrow. But just in case they don't, they're pointing to the 2030s or the 2040s, and all of the governments and all of the billionaires are acting like it's about to happen. So is it possible? Of course, it's possible that this doesn't happen for 100 years or 200 years. But guess what? The governments certainly don't think that's the case. Billionaires don't think that's the case. My math and my science don't think that's the case. And the same goes for a lot of the people that I talk to who are working as professors, or they're working at NASA or other places like this. They're like, this is it. This is it. And when you take a look at the way the masses are acting as well, they're acting the way that you would expect them to be acting under this increased radiation. So there's a lot of studies about what this kind of extra radiation does to the human brain. Two main things. First, it affects the hippocampus, which is where our cognitive processes take place. It inhibits those, which is a fancy way of saying everybody slowly gets a little bit dumber. Now, while this is happening, a part near the center, way deep in there, called the locus coeruleus, gets overly excited. This is what deals with terror, fear, panic, anxiety, and causes one to act with emotional instability. So if it seems like the world is getting a little dumber and becoming more emotionally unstable and reacting out of fear, yes, it is. And there's a very good reason for it. It's why everything else that is happening. It's why the climate is changing. It is why the animals can't seem to navigate properly. It is why there seems to be this slight increase year after year in radiation and all the detectors from satellites all the way down to the ground here. And it's because we are in this magnetic pole shift. And so it's the kind of thing where, okay, yeah, maybe I'll give it a 5-10% chance this doesn't happen for 10 more generations. I got 3 kids. I'm not taking those odds. I'm going to prepare like it's coming when my math says it's coming. I'm very good at math.
I got 3 kids, and so I appreciate the last statement, because I'm like, okay. Me and Fear, I'm just, once again, if I wish I would have known about where I sit on this side, I guess, Ben, is what if I'd known about COVID, right? Because after I've interviewed, you're going to be episode 731, I think, and where I'm at with that is, for the longest time, I was in a bit of a denial about COVID, right? I started talking to doctors and lawyers and professors right in the middle of 2021. And I was kind of under the thought process, nobody saw it coming. But then I interviewed so many people where I'm like, oh no, it was a slow trickle. Everybody knew it was coming. This has been planned for a long time. And I don't know if anyone can push me off that hill anymore. I just interviewed way too many smart people, way smarter than me, that talked about that. And I always say, if I would have been doing this 2 years earlier, I would have seen it coming for what it was. That's what a ton of people saw. right? That's where we all went searching for the Alex Jones and others to try and make sense of what the heck was going on. They've been talking about different things for a long time. So with this, I only bring up the maybe it could be another 100 years just to see what you'd say, because I'm already probably in the camp of like, yeah, but when you got multiple sources all pointing to some similar set in there, it's like, okay. Then my next question is, what can people do in order to adjust or prepare or whatever word you want to use so they can take the fear out of it? Because if we get hit by a damn meteor and we all die, there's nothing I can stop that, right? But there are things in your life with your kids and your wife that you can do that if an event like this happens where you wake up one morning and the phone just doesn't work anymore. Okay, well, maybe, and you look up and you got purple and blue northern lights, maybe you can just do simple math and go, well, I know what's happening right now.
I don't think I could imagine a better thing for us to close out on here as I just looked at the clock. So best question possible. I always find it better when, it's one thing to identify a problem. That's useful. But when you can identify a solution, that's even better. So first, what not to do. Do not go nuts. Do not go crazy. Do not go move off into the mountains somewhere off grid and literally hide yourself away from the entire world. That's not a good idea. But what is a good idea is what a lot of people call prepping. Making sure you've got extra food, making sure you've got extra water. Given the severity of this, you may want to actually get some seeds. For those of you in Canada, I realize it's a little harder to get a firearm than it is here in the United States, but find a way to arm yourself. Can you get bow and arrow? Can you get an axe? Can you get a crossbow? Find a way to defend yourself. And just imagine if there's no electricity and you got to get your own food. You've got to keep your family warm in the winter. You've got to get your own water. You've got to do all of these things. What are you going to need? Now, you say you're in the middle of Alberta or Saskatchewan? Where did you say you are?
Yeah, right on the border of Alberta, Saskatchewan, roughly 8 hours north of the border from like Montana.
Not the worst place in the world to be. If you need to find water, you can go find it. If you need to hunt, you can probably do that. Your biggest concern would be, okay, what do I do when there's no electricity and that worst 2 weeks of winter is here? And there's all that snow and it's preposterously cold and so windy that frostbite is a concern stepping outside. And there's no electricity. There's no heat. What do? That's your biggest concern. Unfortunately, in addition to all those things we've been talking about, they also notice a lot of earthquakes and a lot of volcanoes and a lot of tsunamis and a lot of other things like that occur during these cycles. So you don't want to be near a big volcano. You don't want to be near the coast. You don't want to be near a major fault line. And given the way massive amounts of people will act when there's no food and no water and panic sets in, you don't want to be in a big city either. And so I know most people cannot just uproot their lives and just go run away to some rural community and still have their lives be what they need it to be. And again, I don't necessarily advocate for that, but to the extent it's possible, realize that the major risks are going to be, okay, what happens when the food runs out and you're in a city of 1 million people or 2 million people? That's something to think about. What are you going to do when you need to get water? Do you have a well? Can you install a manual pump? Because I tell you what, your electric pump's not going to work. Is there a stream by you or a river? If so, great, you got water. Do you know how to hunt? Do you know how to grow food? Do you have seeds? Do you have pre-industrial tools? A tractor's not going to work. And even if it does, you're not going to the gas station to get any gas. They're not going to have any. And even if they did, the pumps aren't going to work. And so these are the kinds of things that, okay, it sounds like a complete upending of our way of life. And in many ways it is. But also humans lived like that for thousands and thousands and thousands of years and set the stage for where we are right now.
I
And
just
so
finished
that-
interviewing. I just finished interviewing in 99. He turns 100 in January. And in his lifetime, they moved north to northern Saskatchewan for two reasons. In the dirty 30s, they went for water and trees. Like, it isn't that long ago where I'm from, where people survived everything you're talking about. Is it doable? Yeah. All right. Would it be comfortable compared to our life now? Hell no. Right? Like, you're
No,
talking about a scenario of like biblical. It's a biblical
that's
scenario, what you're talking about.
It's exactly what we're talking about. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's that kind of thing. And so you come back to this study that the United States government did where they conservatively estimate that 90% of the population could be dead in 6 months. And then you think about the last 5 to 10 minutes of this conversation and you say, yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah, well, I go, it's interesting for the people listening to this. If you're stressing out, right? Because I've listened to a little bit of your talks, among others, on different, on different cataclysmic events, essentially, and what the world could possibly look like. And I'm bringing on two military guys in a couple of days. Audience will certainly know them, Chuck Prodnick and Jamie Sinclair, because they talk about the rhythm of life. And we're going to have a talk about it because, like, to get all frazzled out and then, to go buy, I don't even know what I hear and I keep hearing from people such as yourselves and others is acquire skills, create a community. If you truly believe this is something that's going to happen, you don't have to uproot your life tomorrow, but maybe you could look for a job in a different part of the world. If you're sitting in the coast, though, I am curious, on Twitter, one of the guys said, if you live in a coastal city, is it a plan to live in a houseboat? Did you say that once?
No, but what I did say is I would have a way to float away if you need to, because that's probably going to be needed. They have evidence of unfathomably bad tsunamis. There are sediments in the Gulf of Mexico that they can tell are a combination of Pacific coral and dirt from the Rocky Mountains, meaning a wave from the Pacific got past the Rockies and dumped into the Gulf of Mexico. There are enormous 1,000,000-ton blocks of rock pushed 2 kilometers up the Alps. And they know people didn't do it. It was pushed in a great wave. There's evidence of this all over the world. We're talking continent level tsunamis. Not what happened in Indonesia in 2004, not what happened in Japan in 2011. 100 times bigger than those. While all this other stuff is going on. And so there's preparation, there's location, there's awareness. And that preparation is not just physical items, it's psychological as well. You cannot just walk into this event never having thought about it, never having game planned it, and expect to not be a deer in the headlights in the face of everything that's going to be coming at you in that moment. It helps to do some dry runs, even if they're mental dry runs. Well, what's the first thing I do? What's the next thing I do? Okay, what happens if I encounter this? What happens if I encounter this? What happens if I encounter this? And think through it so that when it actually happens to you, it's boom, 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 quick decision making, and you know what the plan is. You know what you're going to do.
Getting hit by a continental tsunami, grab a surfboard and try and stay alive, pretty much.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but at the same time, the way that they are probably going to come, it's probably not going to be like the movie 2012, where it's a 2-mile high wave. It's going to be more like a fast rising high tide that doesn't stop for several hours. So like all of a sudden you're going to be standing there and the water's at your feet. 60 seconds later, it's at your knees. 60 seconds later, it's at your shoulders. An hour later, it's 20 feet above your head. But if you're on something that floats, you just float away in that. Okay, that's a terrible tsunami. That's a terrible high tide. But you can just float away in that.
As we close out the hour, You left me with so many more questions. What we're going to do, folks, is we're going to try and convince Ben to come back on again, because I'm like, there's just now I got to go back and watch some of your stuff, and I'm going to hear the book club. We're going to debate some things. I'm going to have more questions. Either way, thanks for giving me time today. Appreciate it. And I look forward to hopefully having you back on here at some point.
It'd be a pleasure. You seem like a real nice guy. Thank you for inviting me on here. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and